Okay, welcome again, everyone who's joining us tonight. We're really excited to have you here and grateful. My name is Fatima, and I'm one of the presenters tonight. And I just wanted to share some key information before we get started. I mentioned this earlier, but we are recording the session tonight. And so everyone will be muted but the presenters. And if this is your first time with us, welcome again. For those of you that have been on the webinar before, you're familiar with how we've done things so far these last couple weeks. But we're asking folks to please remain muted, as that will support all the folks that are watching us now, but then also watching us down the line to really be able to receive the content. However, if you have any questions, we'd love to hear them. They'll be taken in through the chat. Welcome to everyone from all over. And we will be sharing the recording of this session. If you registered, the email that you included will be the one that will email you in the next coming days. And then we'll also be posting it on our Facebook page. If you follow us, that's where you'll find it as well. So thank you again to everyone who is joining us tonight. Could we click next? As I mentioned earlier, we have had a couple webinars already. The strategy of mutual aid and movement ecology in times of crisis. We'll share a little bit more about those at the end of tonight, but just wanted to say thank you to those who have been to one or both of our previous webinars, and just wanted to welcome you again for coming to this third webinar. And we'll share those recordings as well for anyone that is interested. So just a little bit about the Ayni Institute. Ayni means means reciprocity in Quechua, which is an indigenous language of communities in the Andes of South America. Ayni Institute is a small institute that I am a part of. It's a small training institute that coaches, incubates, and supports social movements and community organizations. We also develop research and content on movements and movement dynamics. And when we say movement, we mean social movements. So the dynamics in social movements and just on social movements in general. And we partner with indigenous communities to bring a new vision of global reciprocity into our world. That's a little bit about us. The presenters tonight are myself, Fatima Paulino, Rodrigo Saavedra, and Carlos Saavedra. And we're all part of the Training Institute. We are trainers, facilitators, coaches, educators. And as part of the Institute, actually next week, we were going to do a program that we call our SEEDS program, which is about connecting and fortifying people's relationship with Mother Earth, community, and with ancestors. And so we really are doing in part this webinar to provide some support to our community and extensions of our community. And of course, people who maybe are learning about us for the first time. We just feel that building emotional resilience is important given what we're facing. And each of us in our own different way has been, as trainers, as community organizers, as coaches, been in challenging emotional moments, even just as humans. We've really been able to take some time to reflect and grow in our capacity to deal with conflicts and moments of transition or change. And that's how we're coming to you. So I did want to mention and note that we are not licensed therapists. And we aren't providing medical advice. This is really purely educational. And if you or others need a therapist or are looking for someone with a professional degree, we definitely ask you to search for them and to speak to them and hear their words and advice. However, we also don't believe that you only need to seek people with professional degrees to be able to learn and share about how to deal with emotions and how to confront big changes. Again, we've been ourselves through a lot of experiences as trainers, facilitators, coaches. And so we just wanted to share how we've dealt with situations and how we've supported others as well. And lastly, this is an introductory webinar. If you have training, you've attended trainings, or are well exposed to dealing with emotions, needs, pain, and trauma, this may be too basic for you. We are doing this, and our intention is to do this for folks who haven't been exposed to these resources, just to try and get as much support as possible out there. And with that, I'm actually going to hand it over to Rodrigo. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rodrigo. Again, I use he, him pronouns. And thank you again for having this opportunity to be in this webinar with us. When we're speaking about when you're thirsty and the well is empty, I think what we're trying to refer to is to the moment that we're in. And the moment that we're in, we're dealing with a lot of financial uncertainty in this time. If you're a worker, you may have had conversations or heard conversations about potential changes or cuts to your schedule, maybe layoffs. If you're a parent, you might be worrying about how you're going to provide for your children, or if others depend on you, you might be worrying about that as well. For me, I'm also I was worrying about my dad and my dad having to go to work and exposing himself to and being outside to the virus. People also are worried about the many payments that they may have to make, whether it's their rent, their mortgages, their debt. We're seeing people from the restaurant industry that might not be able to go to work because of the virus. We have people in many different industries that are facing the challenges today of having some uncertainty about how they're going to be managing their finances in the upcoming months. And the financial challenges that we're feeling are only a part of what we are feeling as a whole collective, as a whole community. There's also a lot of emotional challenges that we're feeling as well. These emotional challenges affect many areas of our lives. So there may concern for our own well-beings, the well-being of our loved ones, of our friends, of our families. There's also many responsibilities that we have and existing challenges that we had prior to Corona that we may be dealing with in our lives. And now we have the coronavirus and this crisis that we have on top of us. So this is all has presented a lot of stress and a lot of emotional challenges that we have to deal with in this time. So alongside that, we also have a overwhelmed healthcare system. And what this overwhelmed healthcare system is that it means that the way that we proceed and engage with our own mental health, that we deal with our own physical health, has also changed as we're urged to stay at home. So we may be having some worries about our pre-existing health conditions or how the virus affects us or affects our families. If we may be worrying if we have any family members who are essential workers in this time, or who are workers in the medical field that have to go, or who are maybe janitors at a hospital. So, or who might be working at a supermarket. All these different things, and all the different community members that we have that we may be worrying about as well. We may also be worried about just with the virus as well, the virus itself. And sometimes when we worry, we might be thinking, oh, what happens if someone that I know or someone in my community contracts this? What would that mean for them if we're not able to visit them, not be able to be with family, to be with that person, whoever that may be? And the reason why I'm sharing this is not to make us more stressed, but it's just to recognize and name that we're feeling a lot of stress and a lot of pressure in this moment. And whether we're a worker, whether we're a student, whether we're a parent, a child, a son, a daughter, whether we're an immigrant, whether we're a provider, whether we're living with others, or whether we're living alone, all of us in all walks of life, we're feeling the pressure and the stress of this moment. And I'm not saying this to make us feel any more stressed than we already are, but I want to acknowledge that these stressors are what many of us are feeling right now. And I also want to say that what you're feeling in the stress is what many people are feeling as well. And that here at Ayni, we see you, I see you. I know that you're not alone in this. A lot of us are facing this. And these stressors are pulling us in many different directions. And instead, I want us just for a moment to settle in and be present in this moment. As we're in this call, let's take a pause. Because these stressors get bottled up into our own bodies. So let's take a moment to center. Let's make a moment to drop our shoulders, to unclench our jaws, to relax our necks, to untighten our bellies. Let's get nice and comfortable where we're sitting, if we're sitting down, or if we're standing, where we're standing. Let's extend our legs, and let's take a deep breath together. Let's take another deep breath. Now let's take a moment of silence to breathe and recognize the breath, whether it's deep or it's shallow. And as we recognize what we're feeling in this moment and what we're holding in our bodies, let's also be grateful and say thank you to our bodies for holding us and supporting us and persevering alongside us in this time. So let's just say thank you. Let's give a lot of love in this moment of challenge and uncertainty. Let's give us some love to our bodies. And in that love and in that spirit, and I think the reason why many of us are here in this call, in this webinar today, is because we want to, as we're saying, build emotional resiliency. We have to realize that we need new methods of dealing with this crisis. We may already be doing some. So I want to say that I hear you if you're doing some, whether you're trying to journal, whether you're trying to write, whatever it is that you're doing, whether you're talking with friends. I want to recognize that as a supportive process to going through this experience. And if you feel like you're just surviving, you're just trying to hold on, I want to say that I see you too. And that I also recognize that this is a very challenging moment for us and for our loved ones. And I also feel like this is a moment where we together can make a choice for new ways in which we deal with those emotions and address the circumstances that we have so that we can be resilient and be strong in this moment. So let's take one more deep breath. The reason why I want to name these challenges that we may be feeling is because the ways we cope and we deal with our daily emotional stressors have changed. So we might not be able to go outside. We can't see our friends. So if that's how we deal with our stress, we go and talk to our friends and we let them know how we're feeling. And being outside and having some activity around it, that may be challenging for us in this time. If we go outside and we go for a run, or we go for a hike, or we go for a walk, and these times that has changed. We're not able to do that as well. And we can also maybe not participate in the same support groups that we have, whether we are in a basketball league and we exercise together and we talk and we make jokes, and that's how you deal with your stress. Or you have an emotional support group that you're a part of that also supports you. And you might not be able to be meeting in this time. That's also a challenging thing that we're facing with today. And if you engage in any activities or events that help you and support you and give you fun and give you a lot of energy and a lot of love, I recognize that these moments in this with the virus that we have is challenging for us to be able to meet up, as we have to stay at home. We have to be in our homes the whole time. And with that, what I really want to name is that the ways that the way that we meet our needs have changed in this time, as we have to stay at home and we have to change maybe some of the habits that that we engage with as we try to go through this time. And I think one of the things what I want to name is that there are, for example, the pre-existing stressors that we had before the coronavirus that we might be dealing with every day. And now, because of this crisis that we're in, there's increased stressors that we're also feeling that are coming from many different directions, as we're worried about maybe our financial futures, or we're worried about our family members, or we're worried about any things that we might have planned for this year having to change as well. And also, by not being able to go outside, by not being able to meet up with the people that we meet up with, or being a part of the groups that we engage with, that means that we have also changed the context for the way that we meet our needs. So the way that we meet our needs, we do these activities because they give us a lot of energy, they restore us. We might not be able to do them anymore. So that means the context has changed for the way that we meet our needs. And all these things together lead into more increased conflict, as well as we might be feeling more of the emotional challenges that we have right now, because we're not able to cope and deal with it, with the stressors that we have in every day. So that means there's this change, there's this new reality, there's us trying to understand what this reality means for us and means for others. There's more stress as we have to change our habits, and we also have to worry about what our future looks like. And this also means that there's transformation that's taking place in our lives as well. And what I feel like we need to understand in this moment is that we need to choose to adapt the ways that we manage our emotions so that we can overcome the unique circumstances of this crisis, so that we can together, what we're calling is building emotional resiliency, because so that we are taking this moment, we're recognizing for what it is, and then we're saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to make a choice that the things that I've been doing, they might have been supporting me in some way, they might have been supporting the people around me in some ways, but I also need to build and do more so that I can be more resilient, I can hold stronger in this moment, and I can actually move through this moment with a little bit more strength and a little bit more clarity, with a little bit more resiliency in my emotions, so that I can look clear into what's ahead. And with that, I want to pass it on to Carlos, who's going to be sharing a little bit more about what are the different perspectives and what it looks like to build emotional resiliency.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Rodrigo, for sharing that, because essentially the premise that we're saying is like the many different ways that we have, the many activities, the many different strategies that we use to meet our emotional or material needs have changed. And now we're confined in houses with their family or friends. And their also needs have been confined. You have changed, the way that they meet, and that creates a lot more conflict. And we all have our own mechanisms, of building, of having resiliency or withstanding the overwhelmness of different moments. But surely some of those might not be enough, For example, for me, the way that I deal with stress is I overeat. And recently I got because of the stress, I got a mouth sore. So I couldn't eat. So I was stressed out because I couldn't eat, because I couldn't, so it's like a whole cycle of more stress, and more stress, and more stress. So it's so important, I think, to make this decision into building emotional resiliency. I know many of you in the call already have the commitment. I think for the people that don't have it yet or are in the process of making it, it's so important that we make it crystal clear that we do want to deal with it in a different way. And before we talk about before we pass it back to Rodrigo and then to Fatima to talk more about some of the practices and understandings that we want to mention here, we want to first talk about perspectives of emotional resiliency, because when people do talk about emotional resiliency, actually sometimes people mean different things. And one of the first things that we want to say is, for us, emotional resiliency is the capacity to withstand emotional trials and tension. This is how we deal with those very, very difficult moments in our lives. And what we have seen is that we all come from different cultures, whether it's cultures within our family, within our communities. We come from so many different cultures and places that already have rituals, mechanisms, beliefs about how to have resiliency, like actually what that means. There's all this information that we already have from our family members, from our cultures, from our places where we live in, that kind of informed us. And all those places kind of tell us what it's really important about kind of our culture, what is deeply rooted for us, what feels really important in how we should deal with emotional resiliency. And really, if we zoom out before we zoom in, we actually believe that there's two ways of viewing resiliency that are really very dominant in the world. It's like two very big stories about resiliency. The first one is about individualistic, that actually resilience is about an individual that is isolated, it's about self-preservation. We're going to talk in a second more about this. And there's another perspective in resiliency that is more communal, is interconnected, it's about support. These are two very different perspectives, okay? Two very different perspectives. So let's go talk a little bit about them. So individualistic. Individualistic means that you're really focused, that resilience is really about you, that it's about you being strong, that you can thrive if you focus on improving yourself, right? It's really part of a larger narrative of individualism. By that, we mean that you feel like you're self-sufficient. You can meet your needs on your own. You don't need others. You can do it on your own. That's the premise of it, right? So there's and we really have to say that this is, through the media, through propaganda, and through a lot of what we see in our culture institutions, a big dominant narrative of individualism. I'm going to be resilient on my own. I'm going to figure this out. I'm sure that some of you have already received through Instagram and Facebook, like commercials about how to have, in some ways, this kind of resiliency. Got to protect on your own. You got to do this stuff. You know, see it from some friends that are like, this is the best time to invest in the market. You got to protect your own, you know, get your own. Like, it's all about you, or me, right? And we know that this perspective of resiliency has a whole narrative of that really talks about this, right? I think one of probably the most prevalent narratives is a success narrative, which is about being successful on your own, that it's about really hard work, it's about persistent discipline. Now, of course, don't get me wrong, any craft, and for the people that know as a community organizer, we know that we have to work hard and put in the hours to develop anything in our lives. But I think sometimes these narratives are made into that you have to have a good life if you actually just work really hard, and the other people that don't work hard, they're not meant to have a good life, you know? So it mixes all these narratives that we're like about actually having craft and good work ethic, and makes it all about, mix it up, that resiliency, health, having a good living is all tied to this productivity that we have. And this, in some ways, a stoic version of like, you have to feel nothing, you know, you have to withstand rejection, you know, forget criticism, keep pushing through, you know. It's a very, very, very rooted perspective that I think a lot of people have, and I think a lot of us carry in multiple parts of our lives here and there, right? I think it's a very narrow perspective, and we can see how different it is. That we saw it with people being in the quarantine process, that a lot of people were asked to be quarantined, and many people said, I'm not quarantined because I'm young and healthy, right? And you can see, even if they care for themselves or within their families, they're like, well, you know, it's other people, you know. It's like, as long as I'm good, I'm good. It's very rooted, and especially in here in the United States, it's a very constant narrative that we get fed through the media, through a lot of people that support this, you know, pulling myself by my own bootstraps. There's a whole set of cultural narratives that inform this. And when we say individualistic, we don't mean only a person. We mean, could be an individual, could be a family that says, oh, we're a family and it's about us versus the other family, you know? Or we can say, oh, individualistic is our whole nation against the other nations. Who cares about how they respond to Corona? It's about us. Or it could be as a whole species. We humans are fine as long as Mother Earth is in a bad place. We don't care, we're fine, you know? It's a very, very narrow perspective. But there's another view which is more communal, which is a more communal view of resiliency. And this view of resiliency says that the most resiliency you can get is if actually everyone in the community, whether it's your family or your friends or the people in your neighborhood and in the people in the other communities, if actually everyone shares and distributes the risk and the support so that everyone can be resilient. Resiliency is not found in one person having all the things, having all that support. That's not what resiliency is. Resiliency is if it's distributed in everybody. If we have more people that can withstand this, you know, if everyone quarantines and we protect the healthcare system, right, that creates more resilience. It's a whole different perspective, right? And we're seeing the battle of these two cultures right now happening in the way we're dealing with the coronavirus, right? We're seeing kind of these two big versions of resiliency. Now, we know that, and I say this, a lot of people that already know us in Ayni, you all know that we are part of many social movements because we believe that we want to change the world, because we know that our larger culture needs to change from a culture of individualism, of isolation, you know, of hoarding resources from one group of people, to a culture of reciprocity, of community. That's a larger vision. It's going to take us some time, but for sure this pandemic has given us a big opportunity for people to reflect around the culture that we have. And it is also safe to say that our culture was not prepared for the crises that we were already facing, because we were already facing an economic crisis, a climate change crisis in so many different issues of incarceration, of poverty. We were already not even meeting. So our culture hasn't been strong. And part of what we want to say, the challenge that I think we want to offer to each one of us, all of us, including us on the call too, is that we want to take leadership in building collective emotional resiliency, whether it's right now in our households, with the people that we're talking to more, because the more stress is going to create more rupture in relationship. And that's in some ways what we're going to be talking and addressing as we go through this presentation. And that might just be that happens at the home. And I can tell you just from our home, we can already see tensions, whether it's by purchasing, how we do the market, who wants to work, how we use the share space. There's all the conflicts that we get in the sink, so there's all these tensions. And not everyone, I think, on our household has made a commitment to have more emotional resilience or to shift it. I don't know if that makes any sense. I think everyone is committed to, I'm going to do the best to withstand this, but not everyone is making the conscious decision to actually learn new things. That maybe the things that we had before, and some of them that are not available, we might need to shift them. Okay, so we know there's a big culture that we need to change. Those are informing. Some households are more on one side than the other. And that could tell you already what the battle it is, right? And we want to really start with each one of us. But the difference, even if it starts with us as individuals, is that it's not individualistic, because we know that the resilience is not on us. The resiliency is on us and getting other people to be in resiliency with one another, so that we can increase the health of our households and all of our families and friends, so the people that we are going through this quarantine with. And what Rodrigo and Fatima and I are going to guide a little bit is we're going to really talk about 3 concepts and some practices as well. One is cultivating awareness, which is key. Rodrigo's going to talk more about it. Second, which is a big part of this presentation, is Fatima talking about managing emotions and needs. And last, processing pain and trauma, which I want to talk a little bit about it because of the intensity of this moment. These are basic things that we think are very important, but with some frameworks that I think could really orient us. And one thing that we want to say is, like, all these things that we're trying to give you an introduction and an orientation, but these things are learned through the practice. And because of if we were able to see each other face to face, or we had a class where we would take 10 or 12 of you through a process of this, we would be able to actually go through the exercises, do all the practices to really deepen. But in this workshop, we cannot do that. But what we can do is at least give you the orientation and then provide the supports so that you can start practicing on your and seeing the results and experimenting with what feels good for you or not. So just with that, I'm going to pass it to Rodrigo. Again, if people have any questions as we do in our clarifications, you can put them on the chat. I'm also trying to manage the chat, so we're going to try to answer as we go through the sessions. And of course, at the end, there will be a big Q&A. So I'll pass it to you, Rodrigo.
Thank you, Carlos. The first part that we want to talk about, as we're focusing on how we build collective resiliency, as Carlos is sharing, is how do we cultivate awareness? So right now, I want to share that we're going through a transition. And this transition is very deep, is very encompassing for all of us all across the world. And I want to name that transitions are happening constantly. And we're going through a moment of transition at a global scale, when we're being asked to stay at home, where we're not able to relate to the people that we usually relate to. Our work is changing. And we've been seeing different types of responses all across the world, many different ways that we've been trying to figure out how we communicate with each other, how we relate to each other, despite the challenges that we're facing in this time. And what I want to name is, I want to define what transitions are, because transitions for us, as we're naming that, transitions are in between moments that are marked by a departure of what is considered normal towards a stage of uncertainty where structures and norms are redefined. And in many ways, these transitions are where we're departing from maybe what was the past, or what was the normal, the status quo, what was the usual for us, and the future, what that may look like after this transition is still undefined. We're not sure what that's going to look like, but these transitions are these in-between moments. And these in-between moments that we're like the one we're experiencing right now, it's something that at least that we understand we need to be held through these moments, and we also need to hold others during these moments of transition. And the reason why is because these moments of transitions are actually, it's just one representation of many transitions that we actually experienced before in our lives. So whether we've graduated, whether we just had a child, whether we are just going to school, whether we're getting married, whether we're participating in some religious ceremony, or whether we are entering the different stages of our lives, whether it's from childhood to becoming a teenager, to young adulthood, to adulthood, to becoming an elder and a senior. There's many transitions that we engage with in our lives already. And there are many of these transitions, there are traditions, there are rituals, and there are practices that have supported us through them. So whether we cultivate awareness through some meditation, whether we dialogue and we hold a ceremony, when, for example, in a bar mitzvah, when a young boy is becoming a man, and we hold them through that by having them read part of the scriptures, and we have them also talk with other men and about what that means and what it means to become a man. We also have different transitions for when we're changing into different seasons as well. So we might have a ceremony or an offering when we're going from summer to fall, to recognize that transition, to recognize that change. And these transitions and these rituals that hold us through it, it's part of already some of the ways that we try to cultivate awareness about these transitions and moments that we're going through. And also, these transitions that we go through sometimes are very challenging for us as well, because our expectations and the attachments that we have to what was before the transition took place. So if, for example, with this transition that we're going through with the coronavirus, we might have a particular way that we were going to work, or we had specific plans that we were going to do, whether we had weddings planned, whatever plans that we had, they're changing, or they're going to change because of the moment that we're getting. And we might be feeling some grief and some loss to the changes that we're feeling, because might not be able to engage in the same way that we wanted to. We might be feeling some resistance as well. We might want to come back to a form of new normal, but we can't in this moment because of how difficult and how overwhelming this experience is. So all these different changes that we're feeling, all the attachment that we're feeling, and some of the resistance and grief that we're feeling are part of this experiences as well. And for example, for me, I want to share a personal story. That's me in the left. When I was in high school, I had just learned that I was undocumented. I had gone through this whole experience of learning that I was undocumented, when I was told that, and at that time, when I learned about it, it was still very taboo. You didn't really speak about it anybody. People didn't really know how to support each other through that process. But when I found out, I gratefully had a group of people around me that I could in some ways ask and talk to them and say, hey, what is it like to be undocumented? What does this mean for you? How do you go through this? And how do I apply for school? How do I talk to my guidance counselor? How do I talk to my friends about it? Sometimes I didn't want to talk to my friends because of the shame I felt around it. And sometimes at least some of these people would hold me through those moments because I could talk to them and they could say, you know what, Rodrigo, what you're feeling is what I'm feeling as well. And it gave me this experience of talking to others. It also gave me an opportunity to work with others as well, to rise to the occasion and maybe pushing for different things that supported in my status. And it built some resiliency in me as I was actually sharing with folks, okay, this is my story. This is what it feels like, getting things off my chest, and also sharing with others and connecting with others about what this moment was for me. And as I was doing that, I learned a lot about what it meant to be undocumented, not just because I was in it myself, but I was with others. And I know that a lot of people don't have that experience. So we might have experienced learning that we're undocumented in isolation, learning it alone. And I also had the opportunity to go to school and go to the university when other people have the challenges not being able to go and not having the circumstances be there for them to be able to attend, that also present challenges of having to enter the workforce and being undocumented and having to experience what that means, and not being able to have a support group around you that can share with you what that means and what that looks like for you. So for me, I carried a lot of pain of what it meant to be undocumented, but a lot of people supported me by sharing with me what it meant and building some awareness in me of what that looked like. And after that, I learned a little bit more about what I was feeling because I had the opportunity to go to a Vipassana retreat. So a Vipassana retreat is a 10-day silent meditation retreat where we meditate about 10 hours a day. And all they ask you to do is in some ways to focus on your breath for the first few days. And For me, I started to notice all the pain that I still had about being undocumented rise up to the surface. Kind of like when you're boiling a soup and things rise to the surface, you start to finally be able to see them, because I had taken a moment to quiet myself, but I couldn't quiet myself in the beginning. I had so many thoughts racing through my mind, and racing and racing and racing. And then as they're racing, I start to notice patterns of what I was thinking about, what I was feeling in that moment, stories that I was sharing to myself about what I felt, about what I went through, about what I felt, what it meant for me, and what it meant for my life. And as I started to notice what those things that were rising up, I started to say, you know what, there's a lot of undealt with pain here, a lot of challenges here. And as I started to continue to meditate, continue to build that awareness of what I was feeling inside, things that I didn't know I was feeling, that I actually started to say, okay, I need to make a choice about these thoughts that I have in my head, about the way that I believe my life looks like, or what it means for me to be undocumented, that I can actually, start to awaken and build an awareness in me. And that's what started happening with me as I started to look into myself and choose to say, you know what, I need to go to this transformation. Because what I'm thinking about and what I'm feeling and the thoughts that I have of myself are no longer serving me, or they held me and they let me survive for this long, but I need to actually go beyond it and then I need to grow deeper. And what I started to notice is that when I was engaging in this sort of process in my mind, there's these states that I was in. So I was at first in this Vipassana retreat in a very reactive state, because I'm just whatever flows into my mind, it occupies my mind. I'm just thinking about it. It fills me up. It makes me feel whatever I want to feel. And what I really want to state here is that we want to make a distinction between there's two different types of states. There's a reactive state and there's a creative state. So a reactive state is where we're simply reacting to the stimulus around us, reacting with any feeling that may just rise up, that we may be having at the moment, and allowing the stimulus of what's around us to dictate what we feel and the actions that we take. And as opposed to that, there's a creative state. A creative state is where you're responding from your full self and not allowing the stimulus around you to dictate how you behave. Instead, you yourself, from that groundedness, from understanding and that certainty of what you're feeling in yourself, you're able to respond more clearly of what is your full self and be able to take a more creative approach to what is actually going on around you. So one of the ways to do that is through meditation. And when we are in these states of whether it's creative or reactive, we need to understand that right now we're in a moment that gives us a chance to transform, where we can learn new perspectives and create more resiliency for our futures, because we need to be more aware of what we're feeling inside. And we need to be more aware when we're reactive and where we're in a creative state, and what are the thoughts that are in our head that we might be feeling. And meditation as the Vipassana retreat is only one of the ways that we can do that. There are many different ways that we can try to build and cultivate more awareness in ourselves. And also I'll give us an opportunity to transform and change and say, you know what, I need to take a new approach so I can be more emotionally resilient, so I can hold myself and I can hold others. And there's journaling. There's journaling so you can write down what you're feeling, and you can say, you know what, this is what I'm feeling today. This is the things that are coming up for me. And as you write and you write more, you can start to say, wow, I got this off my chest. I start to see in written form what are some of the things that I'm feeling. And you can track it and you can say, you know, this is what I was feeling today. This is what I'm feeling yesterday. And then you can start to think about it. Okay, this is what I'm feeling. Maybe this is how I want to approach whatever it is that you're writing about. If you haven't done meditation before, you can do guided meditation too. And you can say, you know what, I want to have someone that can lead me through this process and say and tell me, okay, this is how you meditate. This is how I can start to calm my mind, calm myself a little bit, and start to understand, okay, this is what I'm feeling. This is what my mind is thinking about in these moments. If you want to have a more kinesthetic awareness as well, you can do yoga. So you can center yourself, understand what you're feeling in your body, allowing energy to flow inside of yourself. You can also have dialoguing as well. So you can dialogue with others. You can share what you're feeling. You can hear what they're feeling, and you can say, okay, this is what I'm feeling. That I didn't know that I was going to say that, but that came out, and that allowed me to understand, oh, this is actually what I'm feeling. Or when I heard that person and I saw what they're feeling, that's also what I was feeling as well. And there's also dialoguing with many different kinds of people. You can dialogue with elders as well, so that you can understand their perspectives, and you can build collective resiliency, because elders have also gone through things that we might not have gone through. People with different perspectives have gone through things that we may be going through as well, just in different ways or in the same way. So we can dialogue and cultivate more awareness of what we're feeling. Another thing is storytelling. So you share your story, or you listen to others share their stories as well. It can give you more perspective and can give you an opportunity to understand, okay, this is something that not only happens to me, but happens to others. For example, hearing other people's undocumented stories of how that was for them was very healing for me, because I felt seen, I felt heard, I felt like what I was feeling wasn't just inside of me. So that allows me to not only hold it in, but not be reactive because of what I'm feeling, but actually cultivate some awareness of how I want to move forward. So there are many activities like that. And with that, I want to move on to part 2, after cultivating awareness, that we also need to understand, which is going to be shared by Fatima.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you so much for sharing a part of your story with us tonight, and just for guiding us through cultivating awareness. As Carlos was mentioning, there's 3 parts to this, and maybe some of you are like, yes, I have a practice to cultivate awareness. We're going to be building up from part 1 to part 2 to part 3. You can keep sticking around to hear more, or watch the video down the line, but I'm going to dig into managing emotions and needs. And I'm going to just start by, again, grounding us in the fact that transitions can create tensions. We feel a lot of tugs, we feel a lot of pulls that are happening, a lot bubbles up in transitions, because we're just confronting a lot of uncertainty, confronting a lot of change. And so managing emotions, the importance of managing emotions as needs is about how can we either do some conflict resolution already, or prevent conflict from blowing up too much. And so that's why I want to start with something, it may sound basic, but stick with me. It's feelings, emotions, and needs. And I want to start with emotions. Emotions are energetic states of mind that help us get our needs and values met. They signal when there are met and unmet needs and values. So you see, for those of you on the phone, you can see there's these little light bulbs that are going off. Different light bulbs are really signaling that there's a certain need that is needing to be met or is already being met. And we really, as Ayni and as trainers, as facilitators, as coaches, we really value emotions. And we think that it's really important to be aware of emotions, because they actually allow us to act and prioritize what is important. They are a guiding force. And I want to share as well about feelings, because there's a relationship between feelings and emotions, feelings being in an emotional state. And oftentimes you know what emotion you have by how you're feeling. And some of you may be familiar with this already, but there are a bunch of feeling wheels, emotion wheels out there. I'm a very visual person, so I'm going to try to show you everything as visually as possible. But the basic premise of these wheels of emotions and feelings is that there are some major emotions we have as humans. And we have a whole range of feelings that are expressions of these emotions, or even combinations of different emotions. So for example, if we're looking at this feelings wheel, out here when we say I'm feeling frustrated or irritated, if you look at the red section on the outer ring, frustrated or irritated, that can really indicate that a core feeling is mad. And the emotion behind that is really around anger. Similar with joy, for example, if I'm feeling optimistic or daring or amused, that can really lead to a core feeling of joyfulness. And the emotion is really about joy. And so I wanted to just take a moment, because we have such a large range of feelings and emotions. No wheel will capture it all, but spend just a little moment on what are some of the feelings and emotions that have come up for you in the past 2 weeks. For those of us that can access the chat, if you wouldn't mind just typing it in. We won't mention your name, but I just want to hear the range and some of the feelings and emotions that have come up for folks in the past 2 weeks. And I'll give you a moment to type some of those in. Thank you. I'm seeing fear, frustration, regret, overwhelm, anxiety, hope, inspiration, anger, curiosity, confusion, stress, uncertainty, discomfort, sadness, depressed, resignation, foggy, loss, feelings of not enough, anger. Wow, thank you, everyone. I'm just letting that in. Empathy, anxiety, curiosity. So if you're looking at the screen, there's a feelings wheel again, confused, lonely. Thank you so much. There's just so many different emotions that we carry, sometimes at the same time, and sometimes there are different emotions that are related to that. And I'm mentioning each of them because I feel they're each important. Like I said, we really believe that emotions, that feelings are absolutely important, and being aware and cultivating awareness, again, building on what Rodrigo has already said, really can determine and support the state, whether you have a creative or a reactive state. So how aware you are maybe of the emotions, as Rodrigo also mentioned, sometimes I don't know about all of y'all, but sometimes for me, I might be actually frustrated and irritated and acting out of anger when actually I'm really just in pain and sad. And so, but being able to be aware of the emotion can allow me to then figure out what's the best way to respond that isn't reactive and could potentially hurt someone else, but that actually is creative or can be dealt with in a different way. And so I want to share one resource that can help to build awareness. As well, Rodrigo mentioned some of the practices already here. I'm visual. I mentioned this earlier, but I love this tree. It's the tree of contemplative practices, and there are practices that are about building awareness and building communion and connection. And so in this tree, you actually can find there's a whole range of different ways, whether it's being still in stillness, or whether it's in relationship to others, or in movement, or ritualistic, or creative, that can help to build awareness. So just like we have a whole range of emotions, a whole range of different feelings as well, there's a different range and different ways of building awareness. And again, just the importance of building awareness in really determining a state of being creative or reactive, and of creating more conflict or creating more tension in relationships. And building off of emotion, we said emotions are important, and I want to now tie into actually the relationship to needs and values. So emotions are important because they signal needs and values. And so the light bulbs that are going off, if you can see them, they're really just saying, okay, this is a need that I have, or this is a need that is being met right now. Like joy as an emotion is signaling, okay, there's a need that's being met. Maybe it's of connection, or maybe it's of honesty or values as well. And there are another way to look at this is like an iceberg, and that feelings and emotions are what we see at the top, right? They're expressed, and usually we're seeing them, and needs and values are really what's at the bottom, or underneath, what's at the root, what's at the depth of them. And for me, this has been just a very important distinction that has supported me in understanding and being able to see when I'm sad or angry, or irritated, or feeling kind of lonely, to really understand what is the need, or what's coming up, but also to see it in other people. And so you can only really meet your needs if you have them. And sometimes we feel our emotions, but we don't fully understand what they're signaling. we don't always understand the relationship between our emotions and our needs. And so I wanted to share a couple of visuals again about when we're saying needs, just the range that can also exist. So some of you may have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is a simplified way of seeing needs, and that there are different categories of needs. There are needs related to physiological needs like food, water, warmth, and rest. And then there's others that are related to what are called esteem needs or prestige or feeling accomplishment. And one of the things that is important from the hierarchy of needs that I have learned is that sometimes to meet some of the physiological needs, in order to meet, the psychological needs that feel like a little higher on the hierarchy, you actually need to first address the basic needs, maybe of safety or physiological needs. And I'll share an example in a minute, but I wanted to demonstrate also a whole nother, I love this because it's a whole inventory of different needs. Again, there's a large range of needs. This is from the Center for Nonviolent Communication. We'll include this in our resource page down the line. But whether or not you subscribe or follow the hierarchy that I mentioned earlier, the important thing, the thing that I want to drive is understanding that there can be so many different needs. And so we can't just say, just because you're feeling anger as an emotion, that must mean that you have a particular need. It could actually mean a whole variety of needs. And so one example of maybe a simple or one that folks will recognize pretty easily is the word hangry. So hangry is a mix of the word hungry and angry. And so I, after some time, have come to admit that I can be a hangry person. So I love my partner, my friends, my family, and yet when I'm hungry, I'm not as open to being intimate or vulnerable, because there's a part of me that's distracted until I get to eat. And for some people, it happens with rest. For others, it's around feeling safe. And how I can act out sometimes is that I'll be frustrated or angry around noon, maybe even later at 3. And I'm really grateful to my partner because they really learned to know, okay, do you want a snack or do you want food? And I know that I'm smiling or kind of joking about this, but the reality is that when it's happening to me, I'm not having fun. I'm not really feeling that it's a playful moment. And so it really does matter how my partner is reacting. But another example of, and I want to share this graphic related to it as well, that feelings and emotions are what we see, but they can also be fuzzy. They can be expressed in complex ways. And needs and values are the big important things we don't often see, but are the root of what's happening. And an example related to this is that 6 months ago, I lost my grandmother from the Philippines. She passed away, and in dealing with the loss of my grandma over these last 6 months, it's really been an iterative process, and it's looked completely different every time. Sometimes I'm easily irritated, and it's because I miss her, and what I'm needing is just to be held or to share stories about her. Other times I'm actually feeling like I need humor and I need to just share stories about her and laugh about her and have connection with people around her memory. And other times I know I've spent like some nights where I was just, before going to bed, was thinking about her and started missing her and would start crying and just needed really to express those emotions and to not be holding it in, and to be told it's okay to feel like I miss her, to be held in that moment. And so it can be very complex, or it can seem a little easier. But the more that we build awareness of feelings, emotions, and also the needs that we might have, the more we can also support others in this process. And so I want to share about one very key thing around processing emotions and managing needs that I have learned that has been super helpful for me and that I share often with others, but is around the key of receiving empathy and deep listening. And I want to spend some time on what empathizing means, what deep listening feels like and looks like, but just the importance of receiving empathy and deep listening to really process emotion and even manage the needs that are coming up. And so empathy is being able to be in someone else's shoes. So when someone is empathizing you, they're feeling or they're being able to be in your shoes. And when you empathize on someone else, you're being able to be in their shoes. I know we've heard that expression, but it's about really being able to feel and be there for the other person. And the reason why empathy is so important is because it can meet needs in and of itself. So it can meet the need of being understood, feeling listened to, being held, being seen, being affirmed. And empathy, and I want to these are important as well, but empathy is not endorsement. I really appreciate that empathy is not endorsement, because just because you're listening does not mean that you're agreeing automatically to what the person is saying. So when I empathize with someone else, I just keep in mind that my role is around this deep listening, this observation. It's not about judgment and evaluation or giving advice or interpreting or making meaning or analyzing or criticizing or even telling my own story to relate. And what I want to do is actually just spend a little bit of time and have you all reflect on how does it feel to be empathized with. And I'll share an example for myself in case that's helpful for you. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of the phrase, "you're my rock" before, or if you've told someone, "thanks for being my rock." For me, that's kind of what it feels like to be empathized with. I feel like I'm vulnerable and someone else is just holding me in it, and I feel safe enough to let go, to cry or to scream or to dance or to just share honestly. And they literally, oftentimes, my partner can attest to this, they literally hold me. Even if I tell them sometimes I don't want to be held, actually, that is what's supportive to me. Or I can just feel that they're listening, they're not distracted, and they're present. And that's just so important to me, to feel the presence, feel someone that's there for me. So what are the ways it feels like for you to be empathized with, and how does it look like and feel to you? You can write it in the chat, so we can share other ways that folks feel empathy or empathize with, or you could send it directly to me. If you don't want us to be sharing your name or anything, that's okay too. And I'm just going to wait a moment for you to share just how it feels like. How do you know when you're being empathized with? I know all the messages come in all at once. You feel validated, compassionate acceptance of wherever you're at. It makes you feel not alone, feel connected to another human on a soul level, even though they cannot change the situation. I love that. They're not responsible for changing the situation, but you can still feel seen. You feel like you've released, or what we call unloading. Feeling seen, I'm seeing a lot of feeling seen. Like you're not crazy, you can trust yourself, heard, you feel worthy, affirmed, grateful, with company. Thank you, everyone that shared so far. You don't have to think about how to say things. That's great. Thank you. Soft. It's validating, trust, empowered. Great. Again, it's just so important. And some of us have already experienced feeling empathy, or feeling empathized with, and just how important. And that in itself is just a tool or a practice or something we can do with other people. I love when we say we need empathy and deep listening to really process emotions and needs and to manage needs, because at the end of the day, we can't empathize and have deep listening without someone else. So I love that it actually is about being in relationship with other people. You don't feel rushed, you feel empowered, you have an existence outside of yourself, you feel heard and validated, you can work through your feelings. That's right. People aren't judging you when this is happening. Thank you for all of the ways that you're sharing. And it's really about feeling heard. And sometimes people either giving advice or criticizing kind of takes back feeling heard. And so just the importance of being able to just sit and to hold or be held with someone. And I wanted to take a moment, just because it's so important, for each of you to actually take a moment to think about who are your soundboards. So these are the folks that are just like you're sharing with, that you feel can really hold you, or that empathize with you. If you want to just either write them down, take note of them, or even just mentally think about, okay, these are the people that in the past they've empathized me really well. I feel like I can share with them. They're not criticizing or judging. Sometimes maybe they're giving advice, but actually if I ask them not to give me advice and just to listen that they can, I want you to just take a moment to, and you don't have to share these. This is purely for yourself, but take a moment to just recognize those people in your life. I'm just going to give you another moment, and as I give you that moment, I'm just going to hold in gratitude all the people you're thinking of. And all the people that are soundboards for me too. Just holding them in gratitude. Great. And once you have either that list, then I just want to again hold them and think of them and hold them in gratitude, just because they've done that for each of you, because they've done that for us, and because they could do that for us in the future. And I also want to share that it doesn't matter how big or small the list is. The importance is that we have other people, other people that can really support us and that can empathize with us and that can listen deeply. And I also want to share about other ways to find empathy. Rodrigo was mentioning earlier, I believe, just around support groups. We'll share different lists. There are different databases of different ways to find support groups that are places to find empathy. I know for myself, when I was going to Al-Anon family group, that I found empathy, even though no one was responding to what I might have shared in confidentiality. It felt good to just be heard and to know that folks either understood or knew about what I was going through, even if they hadn't been through the same thing. And so there's a lot of support groups out there. Some folks may also just feel like they're being deeply listened to, or that there's empathy from therapists as well. That's one other place to find them. And now I want to switch it around, actually, to think about what's important when you're empathizing with someone else. So we've received empathy. I love seeing all the messages that that you've been empathized or deeply listened with, but I want to take a moment to think about ourselves and our role as being folks who can empathize with others. What's important when you're empathizing with someone else? I know for me, in the example that I gave, it was just holding me in it, whether it was physically holding me or not. But for me, what's really important is to feel the person's presence. Like, I don't know all the ways to describe it. It's eye contact, but there's like an aura. And even for myself, when I empathize with someone, I like devote kind of my aura, my being, to just being with the person and being present. And for those that feel comfortable, if you wouldn't mind sharing what's important for you when you're empathizing with someone else that you might want to share, so that we can just be learning from each other, and sharing the ways that we deeply listen to others, or what's important to consider when we're empathizing with others. So I'll give folks a moment to type that into the chat as well. So being present, recognizing the other's needs, being relaxed, welcoming, not judgmental, thank you, not listening or responding or quickly offering advice, presence, deep presence. You see them as good, not judging, accepting, listening, not needing anything from the person, fully present and open-hearted. Thank you, everyone who shared. Spaciousness, compassion, attentive, eye contact, being quiet, not responding too quickly. These are so great, that everyone has shared. Thank you, thank you. And again, I just want to reiterate some of what folks are already saying, visually again, but deep listening and observation. And For me, it's kind of like being in a forest or being at the beach when I'm really present and listening, just observing. I'm not judging, I'm not criticizing, I'm just listening in appreciation and fully present. That's kind of, those are the key aspects of empathizing with others. And I just want to take a quick moment just for you to think of the people you are willing to be a soundboard for. Who are you already maybe listening, deeply listening to, or you're a soundboard for them? I want to recognize your role as well in creating and supporting the emotional resilience of our collective. We just want to name the folks that we listen to and we're a soundboard for. And just gratitude to them for sharing vulnerably with each of us. We know that that takes a lot of trust, and even when we make mistakes, and sometimes when we make an error or commit an error, that folks can still feel like they can trust us. And just a reminder of what Carlos was saying, that really this moment about taking leadership and building collective emotional resiliency. I'm not saying that that means that we have to be the soundboard or to be empathizers with every single person, but really recognizing our role as needing to be empathized with, needing to be deeply listened to, but also being able to provide that for others. And that's really how we strengthen the fabric of our collective emotional resilience. And one last thing before I pass it off to Carlos. But a lot of what I learned was from Paul Engler, who did a training for us in the Cosecha community, our organizing community, to the volunteer organizers. He taught us about need-based communications and just the importance of feelings and emotions that are related, like I've mentioned, and really connected and signal around needs and values. And the relationship then, once we really understand what the needs and values are, for simple collaboration or for strategies that really help to meet those needs. And Paul really taught us, and need-based communication is based off of nonviolent communication, which is a model for communicating. And there are also nonviolent communication communities that exist in over 65 countries around the world. Some of you may be familiar with it. I will say I'm not trained in nonviolent communication, but we still are really sharing all of this because we feel even the basics of understanding the need to be aware of feelings, emotions, needs, values, and the need for empathizing, for listening, are just so key that we need to try them even before delving into or needing to go to any training. And the last note that's super key on this is only once you've completed empathizing can you move to simple collaboration. Sometimes, because we have a tendency to solve problems, we want to just say, what's the need? Okay, let's solve that issue. But really the important part is to really sit in time to the empathizing that needs to happen. And that sometimes we may not doing so will lead us to simple collaboration that may actually be incorrect. And so, for example, I know that one time that I was really frustrated and I felt a lot of anger about a situation that had happened. And only after empathizing did I realize, and empathizing enough, did I realize that it was actually that I had a lot of anxiety and fear about a situation that was happening, which is that we were all living in a house, in a cosecha house together as volunteer organizers, and that we were going to split up. And so even though it was frustration, or even though the need may have been that, oh, I need to address this conflict with how this person spoke to me or what they said, that it was actually underneath it all the need for us to communicate and to talk about how we were feeling about this transition that we were undergoing. And thank you so much. With that, I'm going to pass it off to Carlos.
Thank you, Fatima. So this last part that we want to mention and talk about, and then we'll go through the resources and Q&A. We're almost already at the ending of this webinars. Well, the first thing that I think is good to reiterar, or to say again, is that one is that we have to view this as a transition. I think a lot of people are having a humongous resistance to view this as a moment of change. You know, I think a lot of us are in the denial of the transformation, on the transition of the change. And that's why all practices of awareness or contemplation, they're solely focusing us understanding change, because change creates loss for us, and loss creates pain and trauma. And that's actually why we see some of these tools and some of these traditions and rituals and techniques. And then also with what Fatima is saying around being aware of emotions, being aware of needs, being aware of conflicts, is that because our culture of resiliency is so caught up in the individual and the stoicism, right? That you just have to withstand pain and you just don't say anything and you just pull through, you know? Because of that, all the practices we're saying feel very countercultural to the norm, right? People want to get quickly to the simple collaboration. They don't want to do the rituals of awareness. They don't want to do the work, which, you know, in the traditions of many of these traditions that are talking about awareness and about addressing needs, really what they're talking about is about spiritual work. And that's why it's called work, because it's not something that is just to calm ourselves down. It's actually dealing with the stuff that we have inside and dealing with difficult conversations that need to be taking place. And this last part that I wanted to share is, like, we could talk about resiliency for hours and hours, and we all can. I'm sure there's a lot of you that have some tools that we can all even use to build more of that and even think in new lenses about that. But we were really trying to prioritize in this particular moment that we're going with the Corona crisis, what is that we should really think about. We were saying, well, one is we really got to view things as transformation. We got to, in the context of transition, because then we understand that we're in this in-between place and we can calm down from trying to end the in-betweenness, particularly because this in-betweenness is going to take some time and we're going to go through many different transitions. Two, that I know some of you, and already in my household, we're getting into fights with other people, or we're feeling the tension. And that's because our context of the way we used to meet our needs is changing, right? Before we could be more dispersed, now it's more confined, and that creates more conflict. That's why the tools that Fatima is talking about is so important. And this last one that I want to share with you is about processing pain and trauma. And Rodrigo and Fatima were sharing about that there are moments where we're in creative states, and sometimes there are moments when we're in reactive states. When I get into reactive states, I get angry, you know, and I have to kind of calm down, because then I'm not really making good decisions. I'm just angry and driven by really trying to meet the need of being heard of my anger, you know. And one of the tools that I think it's really important to use is this tool created, this particular concept created by Daniel Siegel, which is a neurobiologist, neuroscientist, called the window of tolerance. So what is the window of tolerance? The window of tolerance is a concept that says that we all have different moments where a window of tolerance is really open, meaning that we're able to tolerate a lot of stress, and moments where a window of tolerance is really small. It closes down. It's not able to do that. That is what is called a window of tolerance. Sometimes we have windows of tolerance based on particular context, right? So for example, we at the Institute do trainings for a living, and I could go in front of 100 people and talk for 5-10 hours, and I love it. I don't get stressed out. My window tolerance is very high. But I could be in my house talking to my dad about some particular issue with him about his work, and my window tolerance is super small, right? So it's really contextual, and we all have different windows of tolerance for different situations. Of course, when more stress hits, our window of tolerance gets smaller, right? So when a window of tolerance gets smaller, we either have two kind of reactive states, to put it in language. Of course, you can say there's hundreds of them, but just two to categorize them that way. One is to be in hyperarousal, meaning that you're mobilized to be anxious, angry, out of control, overwhelmed, and your body wants to kind of fight or run away. It's just, you know, it's not something you're choosing, you're reacting, you know? So for me, for example, if I'm very angry, I just want to express my anger, and then later I'm like, once my window tolerance opens up again, then I'm like, oh my God, why did I do that? Right? Or it could be the opposite, which is hyperarousal, which is like we get zoned out, we got numb, we got frozen. It's not that we want to do that, but we shut down. It's the opposite. It's another reactive state, right? So first, what we're saying is that we have to be aware that we have a window of tolerance, and that actually some days we have different windows of tolerance. Today I might be more open, tomorrow I might be closed, depends on what happens on the stressors of my life, you know, depends if something triggered me, a particular situation, particular conversation, a particular moment that arises, right? And also to know that there's different windows of tolerance that other people might have, right? That you can really see, look at them, their window of tolerance is closing, you know, I can tell that, you know, because I've been oriented for this now for many years. I can see it with my dad, with my mom, you know, with myself, with my brother. I'm like, oh my God, you know, especially my window of tolerance is open, then I can really see others. If it's closed, I'm not even seeing my own sometimes, you know? So that's a framework to understand just more around reactivity and understanding this window of tolerance. And by tolerance, we mean the amount of stress you can tolerate, okay? Now, one thing that I think it's important that we mention here is that one of the big things that shrinks a window of tolerance is when we experience a lot of stress and we experience a lot of trauma. And part of, I think, what even Fatima was saying on her session about empathizing with someone is that we really have to pay attention with our window of tolerance. Like sometimes there's an amount of pain that someone can take before we're triggered. And that means that because we cannot talk, that empathy is about opening our window of tolerance. It's about empathizing in order to open it up. So it allows for more deeper dialogue and to hold actually the conflict or the stress that we're trying to hold, right? So sometimes that's why we cannot be empathizing with everybody, because we also get tired. We have to be able to be in a collective arrangement where everyone is doing their work to create the resiliency that we're talking about. And one piece that I want to talk about, so window of tolerance. Now let's talk a little bit about trauma. Okay. Now again, it's what we're saying is countercultural. And for the people that are in movements that are exposed to this, for us could be normal, but for a lot of people out there, this is countercultural to talk about trauma, for example, right? So Daniel Siegel, in his book of interpersonal neurobiology, defines trauma as an overwhelming experience that has potential negative impacts on an individual in the moment and in the future. Trauma often refers to an experience that is beyond capacity for an individual to adapt effectively, and it can result in a post-traumatic stress disorder in some situations. So I think the first thing that we're saying is, imagine we're saying there's emotions and there's needs. The culture, I mean, you say you have needs, they tell you're needy. You know, like you cannot bring, and that brings shame to us around the needs, right? But imagine on trauma, right? So the first thing that we want to say is that we actually believe that we all have trauma. We all have been through overwhelming experiences that have had negative impacts in our lives, and we have a lot of pain around those moments, right? And I know that many of you in this last couple of weeks that we've been in the quarantine or dealing with all the stress, a lot of trauma is surfacing. I know for me it is, you know, about trauma that I'm like, oh, I thought I addressed some of the stuff. What is coming up is the amount of the stress just brings up that, right? So for example, my brother and I, we have so many years and our family has a whole history of being undocumented, of being afraid of the police, being afraid of, and a very uncertain condition. So, you know, really making decisions about whether that should go to work as a janitor and should take time. It brings all this trauma from the past. Or when we were feeling in a different context, and then we get all this reactivity, all this anxiety, you know, all this stress more around that, right? So we're saying, one is that it's okay, we all have trauma. Two, trauma will surface and we have to address it. And part of the thing that I want to make sure that we understand around the piece of trauma is that it is safe to say that in this experience that we're having with this crisis, we're all going to experience it in different ways, some with more stress than others, is that we're going to be dealing with large amounts of loss and pain. It's going to be a lot of trauma that we're dealing. I see somebody put a question. Of course, we're all going through an experience of that, of an overwhelming experience of pain, you know, and we actually need a whole healing process in the country even to go through that experience. We will see it maybe hopefully in the next months as we go through that, you know. And one of the things that is very useful to understand in the context of trauma is that our friends at the Relational Center, Relational Uprising, which many of them are therapists and are, you know, clinicians, psychologists on this matters, have so much great wisdom around this. One of the things that to me always seemed fascinating in what they share around trauma is that, well, one is like we all experience all the time, whether before Corona crisis, all kinds of overwhelming experiences. Well, what makes it, and painful experiences. Well, what makes it traumatic? Well, for them, what they say is like what makes an experience traumatic is when we are going through the pain and we don't have someone or other people that are there to support us. We don't have the resonance, we don't have the empathy, either at the moment or after the moment, to resonate through it. So we have a lot of experiences where we have been overwhelmed, but we had support, and those experiences are not traumatic to us. They're just difficult experiences. They've been experiences of resiliency, but are not traumatic, you know, or they're traumatic in a lower level, you know. The experiences where we feel a lot of the trauma come up, a lot of the pain, the emotion, because those experiences, we've been isolated, we've been alone, or we've been told that we got to get over it ourselves, right? So because of that, we have to be anticipating that, because I think, as Daniela was saying, that we're going through, you know, this is considered a traumatic experience, of course, because we're going to have to lose. How can we mitigate all the trauma? Is that we have to create routines once a week or more than once a week, if possible, to really resonate and hold each other's pain. So finding 1, 2 to 3 people in a group, whether they're people in your house or outside of the place where you're staying in your household, you know, and really have a ritual where you're holding each other's pain. And this is so important because we're going through so much stress. We need to let it out. We need to just say what's painful. We need to have resonance with it. We need to have empathy with it. That's going to allow us to really process the pain and then create the meaning and create the resiliency about what's actually the wisdom of all this pain. What's the spiritual wisdom that this is bringing to us? But that can only happen without the group work, and even maybe it's with one person if you want to do within 2 people. I recommend doing it with 2 or 3 at least, because it creates more empathy when you have more people. It has more strength, you know, because especially if you're triggered and have more people, one person can be triggered, the other person cannot be triggered. One, you know, they can resonate better, they can open themselves up more, you know. So we all hold already people's pain. I know somebody saying, how do we know we're capable of holding? We all do it in small ways. Some of us do it in larger ways. But one of the greatest ways we can do is just by listening to people and just saying, look, I listen to what you're saying. I'm not going to give you any advice around it, you know. I just want to say I'm there with you. Listening is so important. Or having a ritual where we can just de-stress, you know. For people have different ways of holding each other's pain, but we have to make it a ritual, just as we eat, just as we do exercise or want to go outside to the sun, the same thing. And this is going to allow us to have resiliency long term, you know. So I want to stop there and pass it maybe back to Fatima. Yeah, so go ahead, Fatima.
Great. Thank you so much, Carlos, for that. We wanted to share some resources, practices, and also continue answering some of the questions that folks have. We did create, similar to our past webinars, would you mind clicking next? A resource list, and I'm going to put it into the chat. And what you'll see there, I'll just go through this quickly because there's actually some I want to highlight, but the resource list includes different things that were mentioned maybe by Rodrigo during cultivating awareness around meditation, yoga, journaling, for myself on managing emotions and needs. You'll see links to the feeling wheel. I showed you a needs inventory from Nonviolent Communication Center. They also have a feelings inventory if you go down a little bit lower. There's a piece from processing pain and trauma, some of the things that Carlos referred to, some websites, and then additional resources like databases, resource guides, different websites, virtual weekly gatherings. And if we scroll a little lower, again, I'm a visual person and I just love the tree of contemplative practice. So you'll find it on there. And if you scroll a little lower, then it's the links to our other Ayni webinars, which Rodrigo will talk about in a bit. If you wouldn't mind going back to the PowerPoint, I wanted to highlight just a couple of these resources. We mentioned it before, but the tree of contemplative practices, if you're already on there, if you click on the link, actually it leads you to the tree where different parts of the branches can actually lead you to other links. So I see it a little bit like a database or a great website interactive map of how to do certain practices or how to learn about certain practices. Some of them you'll see, you can click on them and they lead you to somewhere else. And I also wanted to share this is an additional one. If you can't try this now, maybe down the line, but when I was in a multicultural training, when I was doing community organizing, maybe 7 or so years ago, I learned about intent versus impact, and I found it to be really useful. So I'm sharing it today. But intent versus impact just means that there's a difference between what we intend and what the impact is on another person. So it's important to accept when the impact is negative and seek to understand why without jumping to explanation or apology. And what you'll find on there, I linked it to the Visions website, but then underneath that there is agreements for, let me see, it's agreements for multicultural interactions from the East Bay Meditation Center. If you click on there, you'll find actually a whole a whole array of different agreements that may be useful that you want to just use with people that maybe you're the closest with. You feel new tool, you can say, I want to teach you or share with you what I learned about intent versus impact. So in the future, you can say things like, I know it wasn't your intention when this happened, but I had a negative impact, and they'll know how to hold that. Or when someone else comes to you and they say, I know this wasn't your intention, but I had a negative impact when this happened, how to actually, instead of saying, oh, I'm so sorry that happened, or, well, it wasn't my intention, this is what I was actually trying to say, instead of doing that, that we can actually hold what the person is saying and just understand where they're coming from and hold them and empathize with them. So those are keywords that I've just learned that are helpful. And I wanted to give a shout out to the East Bay Meditation Center, which has those agreements, that list of different agreements that you can look at. There's a whole bunch of wonderful ones that we're taking from Visions. But Rodrigo mentioned meditation, and I'm from Oakland, California, so the East Bay Meditation is in Oakland, and I just really love and appreciate them because they operate using a generosity-based gift economics model. And so that means that they don't have set registration fees for people to attend. Now, because of the virus, they're actually doing a lot online. And so that's just really helpful. Thank you, Claudia, and anyone else that wants to actually share any other resources, we'd love to add some on there. Claudia just shared that there's an app called Liberate that's all people of color teachers. And just one last thing from this list, I know for some it might sound or feel like it's coming from left fields, but there is a link at the bottom of the first page that has herbalism resources. And I just want to mention that a lot of different traditions, and I know in my lineage, both from the Philippines and from Mexico, we have a relationship with herbs that can actually support with different physical things that might be happening, whether I'm feeling or having nausea or just like upset stomach because I'm dealing with so much stress. There are herbs that support with that. There are also herbs that support with anxiety or with sleeplessness. And so just also leaning in for us at Ayni, it's important. We're always talking about leaning and developing our relationship with Mother Earth, community, and ancestors. For me, herbalism is one of the ways to really be connecting, and there's a link there. And now I'll pass it on to Rodrigo.
Thank you so much, Fatima. We also want to share that this is our third webinar, and a part of a series of webinars that we've done another two that we believe are helpful and supportive, and share some of the things that we know here from this institute with others. The first one is the strategy of mutual aid. So this is a webinar that we did about 2 weeks ago that shares a little bit more on how is it that how can we create mutual aid networks? How can we support each other? Identify some of the needs that people are having in this moment. How can we redirect resources to meet those needs? And how can we be strategic when we're thinking about developing these mutual aid networks? What are some of the questions that we might have? What are some of the nuances that we need to understand to be able to develop that? This strategy of mutual aid network was made with Carlos, with Fatima, and with our friend Paul Engler. And we have that recorded on YouTube, and you can look it up if you look up the strategy of mutual aid. And we're also going to be sending the link to that on the next email that we're going to be sending out after this webinar. So that's one. The next one is movement ecology in times of crisis, which we did last week. So if, for example, if you're coming in and you're like, this is the moment that we're in with the coronavirus crisis, I want to see how is it that I can be supportive. If you're already like an organizer or you're trying to figure out how you support your community, even if you're a part of our own organization as well, you can be thinking, okay, I'm a little piece of this pie. I'm doing my things in my community. I'm trying to figure things out, or I'm trying to figure out things in my own neighborhood and my own block. But movement ecology allows us to think about how do I fit to this bigger piece, these other actors, these other organizations and institutions that are also taking place and are also behaving at the same time. And how can we be strategic in how we engage with one another? How can we play to the strengths of the different distinctions of the part of the little pie that we are? And how is it that we can relate to each other in a better and in a healthier way? So it's also on YouTube as well, and is going to be linked in the email that we're going to be sent. Registered, or you have someone else that you feel like will also be curious and wants to know a little bit more about these, you can ask them to register as well. They're going to do this one and receive those other two, as you can find them on YouTube. And with that, we have a Q&A section. So if you want to take a moment to write any questions, let's take a minute. We can try to answer them based on what we shared today. And we can take a look to those questions. If you can stick around, feel free. We're going to be just talking and sharing some of those questions.
Thank you. I also wanted to note it's past night. Thank you for those who are still sticking here with us. We are recording. We'll be sharing the recording maybe as you're getting your questions in, any questions that you might have. Just wanted to note on the chat, folks have been sharing resources. If you wouldn't mind emailing us at ayni.institute@gmail.com, we can also add it to the resource list that we've shared. We'd be super grateful for that, since not everyone can access the chat. And Daniela is asking, how have folks been maintaining their mental health routines, practices, schedules? If folks want to share on the chat, or if maybe any of us want to share as well.
I think just to share something that's been very useful to me with my partner, we've kind of have like a buddy system where for us, I think being inside, being cooped up inside, there's a lot of kind of pent up energy. So it's good to like figure out how we can exercise together. So creating a schedule about that. And I think what's really good about it is making sure that we're being flexible and taking it day by day, so that we can acknowledge when we're not feeling so that we want to do that, or when we do, and trying to make sure that we're sort of constantly touching base. So if you are living with someone else, or if maybe you can do it through Zoom call as well, that's another way to have maybe a buddy system with someone to try to do some of the practices together.
Yeah, I'm seeing folks having a hard time dealing with thoughts of mortality and the mortality of people that they love, and just wondering how folks are coping with that. I don't know if Carlos or Rodrigo have any thoughts, and also just want to again invite folks to ask any questions around any of the content that we shared, or also just what you're going through and maybe want to hear from others about.
I can share some stuff. I know that we're already closing, and I just want to resonate so much with those feelings, Nelly, and I'm sure a lot of us are having them, and they're very painful. It's very sad what we're seeing, and I think it's incredibly sad what we're seeing, and I think it's very difficult, and I think. I haven't. I am immunocompromised, so for me, this crisis feels a little bit. It feels like a little intense for me in that way. But I think for me, what I've done is just try to, meditate, try to be calm, but also really understand a deeper meaning to this. And many years ago, I went through this experience of being very sick, and I thought I was going to die, and I was very, very ill, and that made me confront my experience with mortality. And I think it's a transition, it's a process to do that, and I know my indigenous elders are always telling me that there is a moment when you have to be confronted to that, and that's the birth of the elder, of the ancestor, even when you're alive, to know that there is a larger mission and purpose for your life, but that to discover that it takes time, and it takes other people, thinking and listening with one another, and being with that. But it's difficult. I just want to say it's just a difficult to go through, and I know a lot of us are in different circumstances and dealing with a lot of that. The more that we can have routine and practices, the easier it's going to be. Because the hard thing is that, for example, as I shared with some of you today earlier, that I overeat as a way to cope with anxiety, right? So in these moments of uncertainty, what happens is that most of us tend to double down on our strategy of what we do. So we overeat times one, we overeat times two, or times three. That's what I do, right? But at some point, that's not even enough, right? So part of that is that we need to adapt and do some routines, and create some boundaries with the work and the other stuff to try to do some of those things, And I know also that everyone is in a different context. If people have children, if there's more responsibilities at the household, with work, it's just different, And for us, that's why we need social movements, because it is not, we could be resiliency without addressing the madness of the employment and all those things, So yeah. And somebody said, how are people showing up and holding their communities? And we at Ayni are doing like a weekly resonance call for people that have been through our programs, where we just do 90 minutes of holding each other's pain, And we also do 2 ceremonies for Mother Earth, which are on Tuesdays and Fridays, because at 4:45 a.m. or p.m. is when Mother Earth is her energy is very vibrant for us to connect with her. So we're doing that every week, even if it's just sometimes the three of us, or 4 or 5 of us on the phone. Just even for us, it's so healthy just to go through those ceremonies, Yeah. I don't know, Fatih, Rodrigo, if there's any last things you want to say to close this webinar.
There's to the question of like, how are we holding space there? If you have any questions, how to hold online meetings and how to lead people through meetings online and have dialogues online, there's some resources from the Training for Change website that I'll be adding into the resource list, that you can see about how is it to lead a Zoom call, how to understand how people are feeling, how can we dialogue in those kind of, in some of the confines of doing it online as well. So I'll be putting that in there as well, so we can also share with others too.
Thank you, Rodrigo. I just wanted to say how grateful I am for everyone that's on this call. In Cosecha, we have a principle that everything you need is in in your community or in community, and just being able to see what folks have written in the chat, and just really believing that whatever questions that you might have or whatever needs that you might have, that they do exist in our community, and we'll keep building out the resource list. Some folks have already shared some great databases and all of that. And again, I feel like we're just trying to share what we know and some of what has been supportive to us, and really coming from a place of love and wanting to share that with others. If you want to listen, and yes, it'll take a lot of experimenting, and it might feel weird, or as Carolina saying, it might feel wrong or dumb, but it really is important to work through that feeling of feeling uncomfortable. And yeah, the other maybe resource around virtual spaces for holding any of these is that there are free resources to either have phone calls or have video calls that I think we can lean into. Not everyone has a Zoom account or any of that, but just, I know it's been super supportive to me to be able to see other faces, and even just to be able to have conversations with other people where we're just checking in, and maybe we might not go too deeply, or we might go deeply, but at the end of the day, hearing that others feel confused, or that others aren't just naming something that happened to them, that I'm just like, oh, that's right. I'm not, sometimes when we're in our homes by ourselves or only with the same people, we think, okay, this is kind of crazy, but until we hear it from other people that are in other places, like, we don't get that affirmation or that reminder that we're not the only ones going through this, but also that it is pretty crazy and pretty different from what we're used to. So thank you again to everyone for, yeah, just your patience and for being on here with us. And yeah, sending hugs. This is how we send hugs virtually, but sending hugs to everyone. Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much. Sending blessings.
Good night.